Start with an intro to that camera.
Perfect.
Welcome to StoryPower TV. I am your host, Loren Norris, and I'm so excited that you're here today. I have a chance to have a conversation with a guy that I've known for about a dozen years now, which means he's really old. Okay, maybe not him. I'm getting older, and he's just, honestly, looks the same way he did when I met him 12 years ago. It's all good living, and I haven't been doing it so well. But Mondoe is a guy that has kind of been through all of it. He's seen every side of this thing we call a Christian life, as a father, as a son, as a husband, as a brother, as a servant in the kingdom, as an employee in the kingdom. And the ideas that people say you've got to be able to separate your life from your religion. I think Mondoe's existence kind of flies in the face of that. But I think the opportunity to hear it from his own mouth, what Jesus has done in his life from the first time they met until yesterday, I think some of it's going to blow your mind, and I hope you'll hang out for a minute and just enjoy this conversation as I chat with my friend Mondoe Davis. Mondoe, thanks for coming, man. I appreciate you being here.
So honored to be here, Loren. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I'm glad you were able to be here and available. So for those who have no idea who you are, what you've done, I'm going to start with a really basic question. Who is Jesus to you, and when and where did you meet him?
Jesus is literally everything to me. And he is literally the filter that my entire life moves through. I met him when I was 16 years old in desperate need of a savior. Didn't realize it. Immoral, sexually immoral. Man, I was really good at sinning. I got really good at it, Loren. And I didn't even know how bad I needed a savior. Me and a couple of my friends, the guys that I would hang out with. One guy was white, the other guy's Hispanic, I'm black. We had all colors of the rainbow covered. We were out there together, and we went to a youth Bible study. I don't even know how we wound up at this Bible study, but all I remember
Probably
to
cute
this
girls.
day. Exactly, they invited us. That's what it was. You got it. Cute girls. And we wound up at this Bible study, and all I remember is the altar call. I don't remember the pastor's name. I don't remember what he said, what he preached. All I remember is that there was an invitation, and my heart just started racing. And I knew in this moment, you and myself, we're all walking up to this altar and we're giving our lives to Jesus today. So they kind of had their heads down. They were disengaged a little bit. So I wrapped both my arms. I'm playing football at the time, so I've been working out. Bam, I hit him with that bicep. Bam, I was like, guess what, guys? We're getting saved today. And I gave a nice little headlock squeeze and lifted all three of us up. And we all walked to the altar and gave our lives to the Lord. And to this day, two of us are still really, 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 really close. It's been 26 years we've been best friends. The other one we're still in contact with. Nothing really severed the relationship, but just time and distance grew us apart. But with that being said, that's where I met Jesus at 16. And it's interesting because even though I said the prayer, even though I meant it with everything inside of me, Loren, I don't know how many other believers have this experience, but I was saved, but I wasn't free. Got exposed to porn as a kid. Still struggled with that. And then it came to a point where over the course of 3 years, the Lord really began to deal with me on a personal level, began to speak to me on a personal level. And the things that were fun before, and by the way, if you're sinning and you're not having fun, you ain't doing it right. You're not doing it right. Like, you know what I mean? Like, God made these things to be enjoyable, but it's supposed to be enjoyed in the context in which he created it.
Right.
That's why it's supposed to be between one man and one woman in the context of marriage. There's some things that it protects you from. And when we engage in it in the fashion that God intended, we get to enjoy the beautiful bliss that it provides. Right. So with all that being said, it was about a 3-year process. And by the age of 19 is when I really gave God control. Sometimes we say the prayer and our intention is there, but we haven't really given God control over our lives.
Yeah.
I gave him the steering wheel.
Conception to birth is a little bit of a time delay.
Exactly. Yeah. So he became the pilot and the co-pilot at the age of 19. And from there, that's where the Lord has just been taking us on the journey up until this point right now.
Now, when in that journey did you meet Lisa?
So at 19 years old is when I met her.
Right.
And God was dealing with me at this time. And I remember when her and I met, I saw her. Oh my gosh, Loren, you talk about a moment. We were there, University of Delaware, freshman orientation party. I walk in the doors. I look across, and I mean, time stops. I can hear my heart beating. It slows down. And there's this majestic, angelic being just walking. I'm like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my entire life. And next thing you know, I'm in her face. And I'm like, hi, how are you? I'm Mondoe Davis. I'm here for football camp. Haven't seen you on campus, been here a couple of weeks. She looks at me and she says, well, I've been here all summer for the Black Student Union as the president, and I have not seen you at any of our events. I'll see you later. Bye-bye. And she gives me the hand and walks away.
Later, player.
I said, I'm in love. Oh my gosh. Well, fast forward, I hadn't seen her again. Next thing you know, 6 months goes by. She's in the cafeteria. I'm hanging out with some of her friends. And she comes into the cafeteria, and when she walks by us, one of the girls that we hung out with, just as friends, says, hey, Lisa. And she's like, oh, hey, Tawanda. And I was like, you know her? She was like, oh, her? That's just Lisa. I said, just Lisa. You need to introduce me to her. So she's like, oh, yeah, I'll introduce you. So she introduces me. I say hello. I ask her for her phone number. She's like, yeah, I'll take your number. And I found out later that she ripped it up. Third time's the charm. So now it's 6 months I see her, 1 year I see her, and then we're at the 18-month mark. Me and a couple of my buddies on the football team are in our dorm room and we're wrestling. I mean, we're acting like 5-year-olds. The fire alarm goes off. We take our wrestling match out on the yard in between the East and the West Towers at the University of Delaware. You probably have 200 or 300 kids watching us wrestle, laugh, rolling around in the grass. And then I look over near the fire hydrant and guess who's staring at me? Lisa. But she's got a little different look in her eyes. There's a little twinkle in there. And I'm thinking to myself, you didn't diss me twice. I'm not thinking about you anymore. Like, I'm over this. But what she didn't know is that I prayed to the Lord and I said, Lord, I just came out of a bad relationship. You've been working on me in terms of not only being saved, but also being free. And God, I don't want to date anybody in college. I really want to wait until it's my wife. So no matter what you do, Lord, bring me into contact with who I'm going to marry. And I'll wait until I'm done with college until that happens. And I just prayed that prayer. And now she's giving me the eyeballs. And next thing you know, I hadn't seen her but 3 times in 18 months. And now every day on campus, I'm bumping into her as if God's up there like, yes, Mondoe and Lisa, hi, say hi. And next thing you know, every time we're bumping into each other, it's just this awkward like, hi, it's you again. So we wind up going on our first date down to Baltimore Harbor. We go to Uno's Pizzeria Grill, play some video games. And she falls asleep after an incredible evening on my shoulder on the way back to the dorm rooms, and she's literally drooling and snoring. And I'm like, yes, we're in. She's comfortable. She trusts me. So at that point, it was over. We were like, 2 peas in a pod through my entire college career. She was probably ready to get married at the age of 21. I was a bonehead. I didn't realize the opportunity in front of me. So
not picking up those buying signals.
I didn't pick them up, Loren. And next thing you know, it got to a point where we had kind of reached the max of where we could go in a relationship without getting married. And I was always taught, wait till you're 30 years old, go out and have fun. And little did I know I had this huge blessing of my wife waiting for me to just take that step and lead. And I didn't have the maturity level to do it. So we wound up breaking up and going our separate ways and saying, okay, Lord, if this is your will, then let it come to pass. And there's a whole nother back into that story. I don't know if you want to go there or not, but there's a whole nother back into that story in regard to how we came back together and got married. So
let's talk about that when we come back from the break.
Sounds good.
Don't poke it too many times. It's thinking. Well, welcome back to StoryPower TV, and we're going to continue in this conversation with Mondoe Davis, talking about this journey of discovering that God has more to do with your life than just the religious practice of showing up at church. But he does want, he desires, he longs. In fact, the word says he is jealous over you. The Holy Spirit is jealous over you. He wants to be so involved in every intimate detail of your life. Like Mondoe said, it's the filter through which every decision I make is made. So Mondoe, tell us about this. You broke up, inconvenient timing, bad idea, not ready for the decision, and then what?
Well, before I go there, Loren, there's a very, very important detail to this story that I got to rewind and tell you, and then I'll fast forward back to your question, okay? So follow along with me. I'm standing in front of her doorway. Her and I have been hanging out. It's a Saturday. My friends knew if they couldn't find me, I was probably hanging out with Lisa. And mind you, I told you already, I was told, wait till you're 30 years old to get married. I'm a 19-year-old kid.
Right.
And as I'm standing in her doorway, I hear an audible voice, but I'm in the doorway just enough where I have no peripheral vision. So I can't see to my left or my right. And there's this humongous hallway where you can hear the elevator coming up and down, anybody closing their dorm room door, walking down the hall, you can hear anything like a pin drop, okay? And in my left ear, out loud, I hear, hey man, you looking at your wife. Just like I said it to you is how I heard it.
Wow.
Then I hear it again. Yeah, that's your wife. Almost as if there was a smile, and then I hear it again. You're looking at your wife. And I didn't recognize the voice, but it sounded like my friend. And as I looked to the left to say, man, stop playing, nobody was there.
Wow.
So I'm thinking, I'm going crazy. So I start freaking out. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And she's like, are you okay? What's going on? And I'm like, no, I'm not okay. And trust me, you don't want to know what's going on. I'll talk to you later. And I leave. She's like, what just happened? Well, that happened at 19. Fast forward, we were together. I brushed it off. I thought it was the pizza I ate. I didn't know what was going on. And we break up. And to answer your question, fast forward now, after having a career in sports, playing every sport growing up, high school, football, track, wrestling, basketball, college, full scholarship to the University of Delaware for football, also running track. Now, I'm a professional football player with the New York Jets. I'm sitting in the locker room in training camp, year number 1, mentally going over my plays, sitting in my locker. And we had been broken up for about a year. I'm a single pro football player, and I'm not messing with anybody. I'm serious about my walk with the Lord. I'm hanging out with some other Christians on the team. And as I'm rehearsing my plays and preparing for practice, I hear a voice, but this time it's not audible, it's in my heart. And I knew immediately that this was the Lord speaking to me. He says, Mondoe, look around. And I look around the locker room and I'm like, oh my gosh. He's like, what do you see? And I said, Lord, you got me here. This is the dream that I've had since I was a 16-year-old kid. And I wanted to use this platform to glorify you. You got me here. Wow, we did it. And I'm seeing these guys that are in the Hall of Fame, Curtis Martin and Chad Pennington. These are guys that I watched on TV. These are my heroes. And I'm in the locker room with these guys. And the Lord says, Mondoe, you don't see anything. Open your eyes and tell me what you see. And it was like a Saul to Paul moment where the shackles fell off my eyes and I could see into the hearts of these men, like little boys crying out for help. And Loren, they were like boohoo crying, like snotty nose crying. Wow. Like, help me. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, Lord, why is the condition of their heart like that? And he said, the reason why is because they're trying to fill a void that I put in their heart with money, sex, drugs, fame, women, but nothing can fill that void except me. Their priorities are out of order.
True story. Yeah.
Yeah. And I said, okay. He said, now what are your priorities? And I was like, well, God, you're first. Number 2 is my family. Mind you, I'm single at this time. My mom, my dad, my brothers, and then football. That's how I make a living. He said, your priorities are out of order. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm talking to the devil right now. There's no way. There's no way. Are you kidding me, God? I'm like, you can't tell me that you're not first. He's like, oh, you got that right. And then I was like, my parents, that's my family. He said, Mondoe, that's where you got it wrong. I have made you a part of your mother and father's family, but I've given you a family. Now, where is your wife? And I was standing in the doorway in that moment, and that memory was prevalent in the forefront of my mind of God speaking into my ear and literally saying, that's your wife right there. He said, now, where is she? And I had no clue, Loren. We hadn't talked in almost a year.
You ever wonder if God's sitting in heaven sometimes like that Chris Rock, Jackie Chan moment? Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Exactly. I was that guy. I was like, oh my gosh. And it was this moment, I'm like, is this really happening right now? And I was just messed up. So at that point, I said, okay, Lord, if this is really you, then bring her to me. Loren, fast forward a week later, I'm at my parents' house. The phone rings. It's a 302 area code. I'm thinking that's Delaware. There's only one person that can be calling me from Delaware. I answer the phone. My knees are weak. I'm like, who is it? Hello, hello, hello. I'm like, hello. She was like, you know who this is? Don't act like you don't know who this is. And I said, Lisa, she was like, oh, you know it is. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, how are you doing? She was like, listen, I need you to take a moment and answer this question for me because it's really significant. Mind you, I hadn't talked to her in a year. This is the first words that are coming out of her mouth. And she says, I need to ask you something really important. And I was like, okay, what is it? She said, the Lord just spoke to me and told me that you're my husband. I need to know if that is bearing witness with your spirit. Because if it is, I want to move forward. I want to do it right. And if not, I want to move on with my life. And I said, it is. Matter of fact, let's get together tomorrow for breakfast, and I'll tell you the story. We got together for breakfast. I shared the story with her, Loren. 5 months later, bing. And now we've been together 20 years.
Okay, hold on. Before you go to the next step, because
Yes.
I know something is about to come up.
Yes.
I have to ask this question
Yes.
because everybody has this conversation as a couple.
Come on.
When somebody says, do you want to have kids? Mm-hmm. Who asked the question first? Was it you or was it her?
It was me.
And when she said yes or no, did anybody talk about 2, 4, 5?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We had that
And what did
conversation.
she say?
She said, I'll give you 1. You're lucky if you get 2.
And you said?
Okay. I was thinking we'll probably get 3. I can squeeze 3 out.
Mm-hmm. And you got?
10. We have 10 kids.
Wow.
I jokingly say I pushed them in, she pushed them out.
And your youngest is how old?
Our youngest is going to be turning 1 in May.
And your oldest is?
15.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite a spread.
It is. So by God's grace, we have 6 girls and 4 boys. When we had 8, it was 4 girls and 4 boys. And the last 2 have been girls.
Wow.
So never a dull moment.
So how does it feel after everything you've been through, like you said, the wild season and the walking with God season, watching your kids grow up today in today's society with the social media attack on their self-esteem and their walk with God and their being.
Absolutely. Very, very challenging. And you have to be very engaged. It's a daily discipline to connect with them because you're fighting against a culture.
Yeah.
And you have touch points. So my wife and I have been talking intensively and extensively about this. How do we maintain the value system that we put in place? How do we maintain the value system that God has given us and that we're extending to our children as an opportunity? And whether your kids are in public school, homeschool, private school, there's an undercurrent of the culture that's trying to get their attention every single day. So if you don't want to be a helicopter parent and you're hovering over them in every single thing, or an evasive parent that's just like, whatever, they'll figure it out, they'll find food somewhere. How do you stay engaged in a way that's healthy and really prepares them to understand how to think, how to process? And these are the things that my wife and I really are intentional about in regard to talking to them about the things that they're going to face. Like, hey, how do you handle it when you're approached and solicited for sex? How do you handle yourself when someone comes to you and solicits you for drugs? And they're like, hey, smoke some of this weed. Hey, try this crack. Why don't you take this pipe? Hey, let's have sex. Come on over. Let's, man, me and my son just had a conversation. He was just talking about some of the crazy things that some of the girls said to him at school. Talking about, hey, come on over to the crib. This is what I want to do to you. And he was like, Dad. So he had the conversation straight up because we created that environment in our home through vulnerability where they understand that it's okay to have these conversations and it's okay to be human. So we want to create a safe place for the kids to learn, to grow, and to process how to navigate the life that God has called us to live in the midst of being in the culture that we live in, even though we're in the world, not being of the world.
So I know you had a long career in the NFL, as you say, not for long.
That's right. Definitely means not for long, not National Football League.
But I also know you've traveled with various ministries. You've been all around the world. You've been, engaged in what the body of Christ is doing for a minute now.
Yeah.
What's next?
Well, I heard this quote that on any given Sunday, you're going to find about 60 million people in church in the United States of America. And in the marketplace, you're going to find about 190 million people. So the old saying goes, build it and they will come. But what if they don't?
Right.
And since COVID, we've experienced a great removal from the church.
And a great reassignment for a lot of churches that weren't willing to stand up.
Exactly. So what if we go out and get them? What if we show up in the marketplace?
Well, isn't that what he said? Go find the ones that want to come to the wedding.
That's right.
And nobody asked if they had their wedding clothes on. Just find the ones that want to come.
Exactly. So in this season, when you ask what's next, for us, my wife and I have stepped out over the last 30 days, we're 30 days in right now, and we've created an organization called Inspiring with Purpose. And we focus specifically, our bullseye right now is 3 different niche groups, very, very niche. And that is student athletes in high school, 90% of which will not transition into collegiate sports. The second group is the 99% of student athletes in college who will not transition into professional sports. And the last group is the professional athlete who is transitioning out of their career into the marketplace now. So again, that's a very, very tight niche bullseye, but it expands out and hits other groups such as leaders, anyone in transition, and ultimately any person with a pulse, because all of us go through transitions. Right. I would consider myself an expert in transition as a military brat, traveling every 2 to 3 years of my life as a child, living in Germany, and then going into college, transitioning out of that, going to 30 countries in just over 1 year. There's been a lot of transition in my life. And the Lord has shown me some things that are really critical to do that successfully and still land on your feet and actually go to the next level in that next season. And we want to share those tools and share those tips with people in a way that helps them handle that with less stress and positions them better to be stronger in the next season that they step into.
So what are the top 5 things you would say if you could do these 5 things, you can transition well?
Yeah, so number 1 is understanding the learnings and the competencies from the season that you were just in. Like, you got to take time to process. And there are things that God exposed to you that will help you and lay a foundation for where you're going. That's the number 1. So when you lay it down and you really think about it, there's a word that I use to describe this process, and it's the word agape.
Okay.
And the process that we take people through is closing the gap in the agape process.
Okay.
Okay. And as we know, that's a Greek word for love.
Right.
And in essence, I heard this quote from Dr. Cindy Trim that really changed my life and really set the tone for this process. And the quote is this: could things be the way they are because of the way that you are? What's the one thing that you can change that would change everything?
It's a tough question.
It's very hard. But when we're honest enough and vulnerable enough to be real with ourselves and look at the man or woman in the mirror and be truly transparent and honest, open, and transparent with ourselves, at the end of the day, it's probably going to boil down to some type of decision about changing your mind.
Right.
And for me, that's what it was. So when I changed my mind, it changed my attitude. When my attitude changed, it changed my aptitude because I was able to see other opportunities and other perspectives. And when my aptitude changed, it changed my altitude.
Right.
So that's the first step, is the attitude. That's the A in agape. The G is to grieve. So many times we move on to the next phase, but we're still hurt. We have hurt pockets. Physically, if I cut your leg right now, in a week, depending on how deep the cut is, you'll have a scar. Maybe a scab if you heal slow, right?
Right.
But when we get cut in our soul and we get cut to the core of our heart, relationally, that doesn't heal unless we're intentional about it.
Right.
So you can be a 6-year-old man still stuck in a 13-year-old wound, and you're operating out of that brokenness because you never got healed internally. You never grieved the pain of what you went through.
And emotionally, we tend to overlook those things because they're under the surface. I mean, if you twist your knee or twist an ankle, you're going to walk with a limp.
That's right.
After a period of time, if you don't get that healed, that limp becomes permanent.
Yes.
And eventually those joints begin to atrophy. Yes. And the same thing is true emotionally and relationally. You forget what it's like to have that close, intimate partnership with somebody that was a spouse or a close sibling or something like that, whether they've passed on to the next life or they're just not a part of yours anymore.
Yes.
You can atrophy in that area of close, intimate relationships if you're not cautious about that, if you're not dealing with the wound and healing yourself.
That's so good.
If you're not redressing that.
That's exactly right, Loren. And so many of us walk around with a limp because we haven't addressed those things. But it's okay to grieve. It's okay to take that anger to the Lord. It's okay to take that disappointment to God. It's okay to ask God, where were you when this happened to me? And to deal with that and face it head on. And when we're willing to do that, and we have the courage to do that, it truly positions us to truly operate in freedom. Right. And now we can not only have a great attitude about the things that we've gone through, the highs and the lows, the mountaintops, the valleys, but we can also grieve it in a way where we get a healthy perspective of what God was trying to do and put inside of us in that season. Right. So the A is the attitude, the G is grieving. The next A is for alignment. Okay. So anyone in transition, now that you've gotten your attitude and your perspective correct, now that you've gone through the grieving process, now it's time to get into alignment for your assignment. And that's where we're going to help you identify how your strengths, skills, anointing, your gifting, your skill set all come together to point you in a direction to say, this is your lane.
Right.
Once we do that with your alignment, now we go into purpose. And we help you identify what your purpose is, which can change in every season of your life. Sometimes we get so hung up on this word purpose and we look at the epiphany of the destination that we forget about the power of the process and the journey.
And we forget that purpose sometimes is so directly tied to assignment that you cannot distinguish one from the other.
Right. So we help you distinguish that if you're a stay-at-home mom right now and you have another 4 years before your kids are out of the house, you're fulfilling your purpose by pouring into those kids. Even though there's this business or this ministry or this book in your heart for later, God is just giving you a preview of something that's to come.
Yeah, right now you may just be soaking so that the content of that book or that whatever is even better.
Exactly. So sometimes we get frustrated because we see this grandiose vision and we're like, oh man, that's what I see myself doing. But we're over here doing this and we're not realizing that doing this well is what prepares us for that.
Right.
So we help you identify the purpose that God has for your life and how to maximize that in every season of your life. And then last but not least, once we get from the attitude, the grieving, the alignment, purpose, then we go to the E. And this is where we engage. And now we're fully present and we're fully representing everything that God's put in our heart in every season that we're in, no matter how long we're in that season. And when we go through those steps with people, it really changes everything about your season. It helps you to understand, it helps you to step up and step into your next season in a healthy perspective and really be successful in every season of your life. So you said 5 steps. Those are the 5 steps.
So what about those people who feel like I'm ready for next,
Yeah.
but they're not committed to finishing well where they are or ending well where they are? Or
Great.
even more so, say the abused spouse who says, I need to move on to the next thing, but man, I don't know how to get out of where I am.
Okay, so I'm gonna answer that question with a story.
Okay.
And then I'll make the point. So there's a home builder and incredibly talented. And it gets to a point where after a long career, the owner of the company says, you've done such a phenomenal job. I know you're ready to retire, but can you do me one favor? He's like, yeah, whatever it is, let me know and I'll do it. He said, I just want you to build me one more house. Can you please build me one more house? He's like, okay, fine, I'll build you one more house. So instead of operating with excellence and administration and oversight and all the great leadership that he did in the past, he decides this time he's going to get the cheapest materials, he's going to take shortcuts, he's going to do things as quick as possible because he's just ready to be done.
Right.
At the end of the process of building the home, the owner comes to him and says, man, thank you so much for all the work you've done, the excellence in which you've operated. You're amazing. I have a gift for you. And he gives him the keys to the house and says, this house is now yours.
Wow.
And instead of living...
Look what you just built.
Exactly. And instead of living in this incredible space that could have been done the way he's done all these other homes, he cut these corners. And now instead of it being a blessing, it's going to be a curse because instead of enjoying it, he's going to spend the rest of his time fixing it up. And a lot of times we do the same thing in life. So the question is, what kind of home are you building right now? With your decisions in your family? With what you're putting in your body? Are you cutting corners in your business? Are you doing things in a way that's unintegral? What kind of corners are you cutting to try to get to this thing over here? But that's the bed you made and you're going to have to actually sleep in it.
So there are a lot of people who find themselves, whether it's by choices of their own or an alcoholic parent or an alcoholic spouse, living in a life that they're going, I know this is not my life. I know this is not what God has designed for me. I know this wasn't the plan that I had for my life. How would you inspire them to say, you know what, it may be time to jump. It may be time to honestly say, I know I should be doing different. I could be doing different. I've accepted. I've settled.
Yeah, great question. That's a tough one, Loren, because when you've made a commitment to the Lord to stand by somebody through health, through disease, through riches for poor, and you have this love, this agape love for this person, but they're not changing, it comes a point where you have to make a decision to say, if there are 3 different types of abuse that are taking place, I legally and spiritually have the ability to move in a different direction, right, where the Lord will honor that. And that's physical abuse, abandonment, and adultery. And if any one of those types of abuse are taking place over a course of time, or you try to reconcile, you try to restore, but this person refuses to change, and you sought out counsel, you've sought out oversight to help you, you've done everything in your power to make this work, but this person just refuses to change, then you can move on with your life. And what I would say is, if it gets to a point where it's deleterious to your health, and you need to draw a boundary, and you've tried to do that, but that person hasn't honored that, then you have to make that decision for yourself in a way that will allow you to move forward in a healthy manner.
I remember a lady telling me one time, she said, for years, my husband struggled with addiction, and I used to pray, God change him, God change him, God change him. And finally, God just said, I'm trying to change you. And sometimes we miss the fact that the bed that we're lying in isn't made by somebody else. We made it. So
good. Yeah, I heard it said that when we get married, we have two cards that we can choose from. One is, if you try to change your spouse, then God will love them. But if you would just love your spouse, then God will change them.
I like that.
Which card are you playing?
It's a random shuffle every day. I think the challenge for a lot of people is the idea of leaving God out of the equation of their life decisions, their career decisions, their education decisions, their relationship decisions. Yeah. Do I marry or do I not? Do I have kids or do I not? I mean, you listen to somebody like an Andrew Tate, and he's, for all of his flaws, he's got some pretty conservative values, and yet a horrendous lifestyle. Yeah. Recently converted to, I believe, to a Muslim faith, and going through a massive change in his life. But I wonder how differently his life would be if it were Jesus.
Yeah. And again, back to what we were talking about even with our children, right? There's so many different pressures, and there's so many different things that people go through, that we go through in life. It just makes it hard. Yeah. And if we're not in community around other people that love the Lord and have a perspective of vulnerability and the value of being transparent and not judgmental or religious, then man, we can easily turn down that road too.
Right.
It can happen to any of us like this. And that's one of the things that I love. I mean, this, when you think about it, Jesus alone is everything, but he also intentionally created an opportunity for it to not be enough. And you might be thinking, oh, bro, like you went off right there. But Jesus set the example. Think about it. When he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he cried great sweat drops of blood. And he literally opened up. He opened up and he was vulnerable. He was transparent with the inner circle of the disciples. And he set the example for us that when we're going through turmoil to the point of stress, and I don't know about you, but I've never sweat blood before.
Not yet.
That brother was under some stress.
Yeah.
To burst the capillaries and literally have it mixed with the sweat and come out of his pores, like that's some intense stress. And for him to open up and be vulnerable, it goes to show the value of that. So back to your point about Andrew Tate, when you think about how easy it is for somebody to get off, most times it's come out of a place of isolation.
Right.
And we're no longer in community, we're no longer opening up, and we've gotten into a place where we've gotten kind of sifted away from the pack, so to speak. And now we're open, we're prey for the enemy.
Or we let pride set in to the degree that we feel like, I don't need you, I got this figured out. I don't need somebody in my life telling me how to live.
Exactly.
And so
other side of that coin.
Step out on our own and make decisions, not just without God, without the input of the Word and the Holy Spirit, but without other people who go, man, I love you. I see you headed for a cliff.
Yeah, yeah. And Loren, I got a problem with not being able to tell somebody that.
Yeah.
I got a problem with that. Because if you love me and I'm headed towards a cliff, man, I would expect you to say, hey, Mondoe, bro, you're headed towards a cliff. If I got spinach in my teeth and I step on your show, before we hit the camera and start rolling, Loren, say, hey, bro, you got some spinach right there. Yeah. Bam. And I'm like, oh, man, thank you. I consider that love.
Right.
So, here's the deal. We risk the relationship sometimes when we do that, because sometimes we don't know if that person will be offended, if they'll be like, oh, well, who do you think you are to tell me? But at the end of the day, if we love someone, we tell them the truth in love. And a wise man or a woman will take that and learn from it. A foolish man or woman will continue to do the same thing.
Well, not only that, they'll mock you and laugh at you, according to Proverbs.
Exactly.
They're going to look at you and go, "Don't correct me."
Yes.
Yeah.
And an evil person will try to kill you over it. So you got to discern. We got to discern which one of these three am I dealing with here? Am I dealing with an evil person? Am I dealing with a wise person? Or am I dealing with a foolish person?
Well, and then the reality is, one of our previous interviews, we talked about love being that time that you lay down life for a friend. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to think, big strong man, I'm going to dive in there. I'm going to do my soldier thing. I'm going to literally die. Mm. I've been a soldier. I've been a firefighter. I've risked my life for absolute strangers. That's no big deal. Put the phone down and have a conversation over dinner. That's laying your life down.
That's hard right there, yeah. When your wife's pregnant, go to the store and get the ice cream. Go get the Bluebell at 2 a.m.
That's the hard stuff.
That's the hard stuff right there.
But doing life together,
yes,
with people that you hold them accountable, and they hold you accountable. That's really what the kingdom life is about, in my opinion. And it is reaching out to that one that you see. You're like, maybe you don't see that cliff, but from my perspective, you might want to slow down or change direction, because that's about to get ugly.
Yeah. And I love the fact that when you look at stats and you look at the old saying, birds of a feather flock together.
Yeah.
I've heard it said, show me your friends and I'll show you your future.
Yes.
And when we're in a body of believers, when we're in a group, when we're in a community with people that love us and that we love genuinely, and we can literally do life together, you're going to wind up being the sum of those 5 people that you spend the most time with, financially, health-wise, relationally. And I think it's really important to be able to do a relationship inventory to find out who is speaking into my life and whose life am I speaking into.
Right.
And when we're able to do that in a way that's very healthy and understand that God put these people in our lives for a reason, it helps us to really fulfill the purpose that God has on our lives.
Well, and you've got to be able to evaluate that both ways. I mean, it's one thing to say I have mentors in my life that are pulling me to the next level. Mark Victor Hansen and Jack Canfield made the comment one time. They were bemoaning amongst them, after we published all these books, we're still, only worth $200 million. Why are we not worth $1 billion? And they went to Tony Robbins and asked him, what are we doing wrong? He said, well, who do you hang out with that has $1 billion? They're like, we hang out with millionaires. He's like, that's your problem. If you want to rise to that next level, you've got to find those people that are already at that next level. And yet for some people, both in the faith and out, they feel like, well, that means I've got to cut off, quote unquote, the little people, the millionaires, because they're not billionaires. I don't need to hang out with them anymore. I can move on to the next thing. And I think what God's calling us to do, both in the faith and in the world, is to say, I have that circle that inspires me, that pulls me up, that pushes me deeper, that causes me to be better, to do better, to have better. But it doesn't mean I abandon those that I speak into. And it's so easy just to be, two-faced or done with those who are, not rising to the level of your next aspiration.
Yeah.
And I don't think God encourages that.
I agree.
So having those 5 people to hang out with, I mean, the disciples, there were 12 of those. I'm not sure which 5 had the greatest level of influence in there,
That's
right?
a good point.
But I do know it wasn't the 5,000.
That's right.
And I think when you think of social media and TikTok followers and Facebook followers and friends and fans and blah, 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 it's easy to go, well, I've got this large group of people who consider me their influencer. Well, that's awesome. Who's influencing you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I look at it like this. I love it from the perspective of, I need people in my life that are going to pull me up. I need people in my life that are going to pull me along side by side. And I need people in my life that I can pull up.
Right.
And I feel like it's a healthy flow. If you think about a pond, right? If it sits too long, it's going to start to stink. And that's what happens with us. When we sit too long and we're not in a good community, it starts to stink. It's supposed to be like a river. And as God's pouring into us, as he puts people in our life that can pour into us, we got to take that, and we're running side by side with those that God's brought into our life. But we have to also reach back and make sure we're pouring into others that are on their way up as well.
John Maxwell says it all the time, be a river, not a reservoir.
There you go.
We're not here to store it up. If we try to gather the blessings of God and hold on to them, we're not doing anybody any good, including ourselves.
That's right.
I appreciate your time, Mondoe.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Honored to be here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you again for watching StoryPower TV. I hope this conversation has been worthwhile for you. I hope it's inspired you to stop and think about the people you surround yourself with. Are you making transitions well? Are you ending things well so you can move on to next well? And if you're not sure about that, if you're not sure that the next transition in your life has a good plan, you should reach out to Mondoe. I'll put the conversation in the link in the notes so you can find that. I'd love for you to reach out to Mondoe and see how his team of coaches can help you make that transition to the next level well. In the meantime, remember that Jesus is not just a religious figure. He's a decision maker for your life and mine. He loves you more than you know how to love yourself. He's jealous over you. Everything that takes your time and attention away from him, he wants it back. And he will come find you. And you may not like the consequences of that if he has to come find you. So take the time to seek him today. I'm Loren Norris with StoryPower TV. Have a blessed day.